dialogue of lies or dropping truths. In my view, it's the same script of lies. Policymakers have lost the ability to reason, literally sold their countries for a song. Or should I say, the ability to reason has been overtaken by greed. Do you care for some truthful journalism? What happened to human rights, freedom of speech, free to choose what you want and what you don't want? Did you just cut me off?
What is government doing about it?
Did they just cut me off?
Blacks should
At what point did they cut me off? Lest I remind you, we are at war. Well, this is Worldview. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to the show today. I'm Yvonne Katsande. So let me just start off by showing you something that really made me laugh today. So Biden telling people to prepare for the hurricane by getting vaccinated. Yeah, because a jab will certainly stop Mother Nature's 130 plus megabyte speed, that is, right? Sustained winds. And the Democrats are so out of touch. They were actually supporting that, and they said, yes, President Biden is right. Now listen to this.
If you're in a state where hurricanes often strike, like Florida or the Gulf Coast or into Texas, a vital part of preparing for hurricane season is to get vaccinated now. Everything is more complicated if you're not vaccinated and a hurricane or a natural disaster hits.
All right, so, I mean, we want to talk about this whole climate change hoax. I know my colleagues was also here telling you about it, but we want to talk about it more. And today, to help me discuss it, I have a guest, and that is Dennis Speed. Now, Dennis Speed is based in the United States, and, you know, he's been involved in quite a lot of work. And obviously, he has and shares his own opinions about this climate hoax. We all have been asking questions. What exactly is going on? Honestly speaking, I didn't know that you needed to get vaccinated for you to be safe from climate change. Very interesting, right? But I'm going to introduce my guest now. Now, Dennis Speed has been a writer for Executive Intelligence Review for about 30 years, right? And he was a founding member of the Schiller Institute in 1984. He was also co-founder of the Africa Civil Rights Movement with Godfrey Benisa, former president of Uganda. That was between 1977 and 1978. Well, he's got quite a big portfolio, but let me just introduce Dennis there to join me in this conversation. Dennis, good to see you. Thank you for being with me on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Now, I just showed you a clip there as we started. President Biden saying that the only way you can beat this hurricane is for you to get vaccinated. I'm just trying to put the dots together here between a hurricane and vaccination. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on it are sort of like the reaction of my cat that I think you can see in the back. If you get a visual of that, if your people see that, and if they don't, let me put it this way. What has happened, and this is difficult for people to accept, but it's not difficult for people to see, is that the transatlantic countries, for various reasons that are not yet unpacked for everyone, have decided that they are going to tell the world how to live their lives. Now, that's not that simple. The reason is that there's a problem. There's an economic problem, a financial problem, I ought to say, which afflicts the banks, like the Bank of England, and you see what's happened with the British pound recently, right? It's almost at parity with the dollar, first time in history. It's happened with the United States, where they issued that $6 trillion that they just sort of gave out to a combination of the banks, and then they had to give something to the people. So they gave $2 trillion to the people, but $6 billion to the banks. Now, $2 trillion 10 years ago was the entire gross domestic product of the nation of India, which had a population 3 times the size of the United States. So the magnitude of what has happened in these countries recently with respect to their financial systems is never allowed to be discussed when you get to questions like global warming.
Yes.
But if you check it, what's really happening here is, what's being said is, hey guys, we can no longer tell you communism is threatening the whole world, and we've got to oppose that. We can no longer tell you radical Islam is threatening the whole world, and we've got to oppose that. we need something bigger because the demand is that we've got to bring under our control of the financial system all forms of finance capital that can allow us to somehow prop up our dying system. So we now have a planetary issue, and it is that the climate is warming, that is bad, and we, well, our planet, and it'd be your planet, has got to step up and change what we're doing. And therefore, they talk about all these measures, but if you check it out, it all goes to the bank at some point. It's about carbon swaps, it's about derivatives transactions, all kinds of stuff that normal people didn't know about before, don't understand now, but the effect is now beginning to come in. And so what you just heard about the hurricane, think about it as the financial hurricane that's about to hit the whole planet, and what they will tell you is go get vaccinated.
But do you believe, or should I say, do you think most people actually believe that there is a climate change? Is climate change even a reality, or this is just something they use, to then achieve this agenda that you're telling us about? It all goes back to the bank, definitely.
Oh, okay, when I check something out, right? We used to talk about global warming. Then we started talking about climate change.
Yeah.
It's hard not to believe that climate changes because there's something called the seasons: fall, winter, spring, summer. How can you say climate doesn't change? Right? The seasons change. That happens all over the whole planet, happens all over, and in fact, it happens in the solar system. So you can't really disagree that the climate changes, can you?
But does it call for such a widespread reaction as to the one that we're seeing right now? Yes, climate changes, but should people now go and get vaccinated? Should people now be restricted to their carbon emissions? Because they did say that they want to introduce carbon emissions per person in the near future.
I just want people to know something, just so it's clear, right? 100 million years ago, the globe was about 40 degrees warmer than it is now. 50 million years ago, it was a little bit hotter than that. 10 million years, 5 million years ago, it was warmer than now. 20,000 years ago, when we had the last ice age, which happened in the northern hemisphere, is what has happened in general, but carbon dioxide actually declined almost to the level that plants disappeared. I can give you the figures on all this. I'm just referencing this quickly now. We can come back to it, and I can document all this, no problem. Probably because of the rise of human agriculture and because of the actions of human beings in the past 20,000 years in particular, not the human being, they've been around, we've been around longer than that, but in this last period of time, humanity probably kept the plants alive by the activity that it was doing on the planet, starting with agriculture and then going to industry. That's one of those hypotheses that, you can argue, but I'll put it like this. There is absolutely no danger to humanity whatsoever from the present levels of carbon emission that exist. And if you want to lower them, if that's what you really want to do, which, by the way, I don't believe needs to be done.
Yeah.
But if you do believe that, I got a very simple thing to tell you. Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s said, we have the atomic bomb. We just blew a whole bunch of people up in Japan. Wait a minute. Why don't we turn to atoms for peace? Why don't we use nuclear power and use that as a source of energy? We go off of what people keep calling fossil fuels. I'll just say oil, natural gas, and so on. One can argue certainly some of those are fossil fuels. Some of them are also abiotic, means non-fossil fuels, which are also oil. But let's just assume we're going to use the terms everybody uses. So we don't want to use that, right? Because that stuff is producing carbon dioxide. All you got to do is use nuclear power. We've been knowing that since the 1950s. So if anybody was really concerned about this problem, or is now concerned about the problem, and this is what some of the environmentalists themselves are saying, like Patrick Moore or Michael Schellenberger, these various guys that used to be big-time environmentalists, they're all saying use nuclear power because that does not give carbon emissions. So people know the solution if there's really a problem. So if you look at all that and you realize that what's really being said, and by the way, it's been said explicitly. When Barack Obama came to South Africa, he said that. He said if the everybody in Africa gets an air conditioner and gets a car, a big car, the world will boil over.
Yeah, I remember that very well.
There is no truth to that. There is zero truth to that. Okay? He said that.
Okay, now, but
Right?
we see, you know, there's an energy crisis right now in Europe. And what we're seeing is other countries that had said that they will turn to nuclear power or maybe other alternatives actually going back to coal, the use of coal, and telling countries like South Africa, once again, I also want to use that example, that they should stop using coal. In fact, we're seeing a whole loads and loads of coal going to, you know, Europe and being supplied to China. And I'm just trying to think, so if you're talking about climate change and if for sure you really wanted to reduce the carbon emissions, then why would you then change from an alternative to coal to going back to coal?
Okay, well, let's go to something fundamental on that question. And I happen to have a book. I have several books, as you can see, with the bookshelf. But there's one here by a man by the name of Donald Gibson, someone that I know personally. He wrote this book back in the 2003, 2004, and it's called Environmentalism, Ideology, and Power. Mm-hmm. Now, what he did, which was very useful, was to quote or to look up, trying to figure out, you know, where does this whole idea of limits to growth come from? Because you got to get to that to understand what's really going on with that European thing, right? Because they told everybody to cut, and then all of a sudden they said, whoa, hey, guess what? Because we're fighting Putin, we got to go back to our own coal and oil and blah, blah, right? That's what they said. And all of a sudden, in fact, they had reversed themselves. They were even telling people in Sweden, they were telling people in parts of Germany, go to the forest and get wood. It got that far. I don't know if you heard that, but that has happened.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah, that's happened. Okay, so now I'm going to read you from something, which is a quote. It's from a British source, and this is a guy who, this is only 30 years back, okay? And I think, hey, since everybody knows, hey, Mandela only got in there 30 years ago, I think everybody in South Africa can remember back 30 years.
Yeah.
All right? So now, there was a book written in 1991, had a whole bunch of different essays, different people. It was called The Green Reader. The Green Reader. All right? So now the guy who edited the book was a guy named Andrew Dobson. He came from the University of Kiel in England. All right? Mm-hmm. Now, so he has a little paragraph I want people to hear very clearly about what he has to say about the analysis in the book. This is him. It's all a quote. I want you to hear it now understand. You see my punchline. All right, here we go.
Sure.
Some savage implications follow from this analysis. Unless extremely implausible assumptions are made. Now, this is all now in italics in the original, but I'm about to read.
Okay.
There is no chance of all people ever rising to the levels of material affluence enjoyed by Americans in the late 1970s.
Wow, okay.
Okay? All right, then he goes on to says, the corollary is that people in developed countries today are affluent because they are hogging scarce and dwindling resources. Our way of life is only possible for the few who live in developed countries as long as we go on securing and consuming most of the materials produced each year. If we shared world resources equally, the average American would have to get by on less than 1/6 of the present average energy used. If these arguments are valid, which by the way, I am not saying they are. Now just listen to his reasoning. I'm going with their reasoning. If these arguments are valid, it follows that our affluent way of life is highly immoral and that we in rich countries must accept the idea of de-development. We should take immediate action toward reducing our material living standards in order to permit the third world to have a fairer share of the available resources and to permit more of the third world's productive capacity to be geared to the needs of its people. Okay, now that's what he said in 1991, right? Check this out.
Okay.
You went exactly, what, 7 months from COP26, November,
Yeah.
when they did all that in Glasgow, and they were telling everybody's got to cut, and there's no way, we got to do a wartime mobilization. I can give all the quotes on that. People need them. From Prince Charles, he's the one that got up and said it, right?
Yeah.
And you
The
know,
new
and
king.
they said, let's cut everybody. Okay, that's what he was saying. I'm gonna read it to people. You have to hear it. Here's what he said. With a growing population placing an increasing strain on the planet's finite resources, we have to reduce emissions, carbon emissions, urgently. And then he said, it has to be, quote, a warlike footing is urgent to force through the radical change in our economy. A warlike footing is urgent to force through the radical change in our economy. And then he went on to talk about how this might not go through governments, it might have to be done through mega billionaire financiers, and talked about two guys in particular, Mark Carney, formerly of the Bank of England, and UN Special Envoy on Climate, Mike Bloomberg, who used to be mayor here in New York City.
Yeah.
And these guys have put together supposedly $30 trillion from all these different companies, and blah, blah, blah. And so we know you governments may not be able to handle it. So we may have to do this privately. Now, see, what does this come down to? What are we talking about? Why did I go through all that? You went 7 months from that conference to the point that Europe started saying, by May, June, basically, right? Mm-hmm. Yo, we're at war with the Russians. We got financial nuclear war going on. We got sanctions going on. We can't buy oil from them. We have got to use our own oil, except there's only one problem. Look at what just happened. Yeah. The pipelines blew up. They blew up those two pipelines. Right?
Was that a natural occurrence, or there's something, an
Number
underlying
one,
hand,
two pipelines? You know what that's like saying? That's like saying that there were two accidents at the World Trade Center on September 11th.
What a coincidence.
One pipeline, maybe.
What a coincidence.
Yeah. No, well, first, the Swedes are saying it was sabotage. The Danes are saying, I'm talking the heads of state, are saying it was sabotage. The Germans originally said it, then they sort of backed off that, right? Yeah. Then Nancy Pelosi in America tried to say the Russians did it. Wait a minute. The Russians can turn off the gas anytime they want.
Absolutely.
So, right? They don't have to blow up the pipelines. So, all right, what we're talking about here, let me be very, very clear about where I'm going or why I'm saying what I'm saying so everybody gets where I'm going with this. Number one, there is no emergency of the type that they are talking about. There may be a need to change the distribution and production of energy in terms of the energy systems that we use, to generate fundamental electricity. That's not an issue. To me, that's just straightforward technological progress, and there may be many kinds of mixes that you can come up with, and that's all fine. When you're saying you are going to demand that people all over Africa, 1.2 billion people now, we're talking about all over India, 1.3 billion people, and then you're going to try to make a demand on China, which of course they just don't have to listen to. That's 1.4 billion people. They're supposed to get less energy and have less electricity than 350 million people in America, and maybe another 650 million people maybe in all of Europe and so forth. What is going on here?
That seems to be the agenda. That seems to be the agenda. Very selfish though. But I would also want to just note that you do know that Europe is broke right now in terms of resources and just fueling up the economy. Likewise, I don't know what Biden's administration is really up to, but it seems like things are a bit of a mess there in America because of this administration. Now, obviously coming to Africa to plunder the resources, take whatever they can, is an obvious agenda that is out there in the open. Everybody can see it. But I want to hear what your comments are on this. Listen to this now. So, the Biden regime is to use about $22.5 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act to pay farmers not to grow food because you know what? Because of the climate. I have never known, whatever the changes are in the climate, that people would stop growing food. If anything, we know that food comes from the soil, right? And everything else that comes out of there will be byproducts of the food that is actually grown in the soil. Better solutions exist to improve soil carbon content than non-productive cover crops. But climate idiocy, if I should say, demands less food to be grown. However, the climate change hoaxes are guys for this cabal to be able to justify weather modification. Now, Dennis, I want you to just quickly listen to this, and then I'll come back to you to hear what your comments are.
Force is on record as saying, quote, they want to control the weather by 2025, and we are not talking about just seeding the clouds for rain. Of April this year, there are more than 150 different weather modification programs around the world. Since about 2000, the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy have been spraying the entire United States sky with a toxic brew of chemicals and other biologic agents. Military and some commercial jets have been fitted with huge barrels of at least 49 different kinds of documented chemical poisons. Among other documented ingredients in this toxic man-made clouds are pathogenic molds, fungi, weaponized viruses, and made in some places like the secret site at Fort Detrick, Maryland, which is supposed to be a cancer site, but there.
All right, Dennis, I don't know if you got to really hear what that lady was saying. There's just some horrible background music there. Sorry about that. But she's saying that it was the agenda of messing around with the climate come 2025. So 2 questions here. Why is the food being attacked? If there's climate change, how then would it be a better solution to have non-productivity from the soil, stopping farmers? We already see this happening in the Netherlands. The Dutch farmers are suffering from this whole climate change nonsense. This seems to be also going on, in different countries, and it will spread to other countries as well. What's your take on that?
All right. Well, first of all, let me give people some good news so that it's clear what is happening. European farmers, you already referenced the Dutch farmers. It's also the case that you have people in Germany. I was just recently in Paris, just about 10 days ago.
Yeah.
Met with some people there who have the same attitude. Italy has this, Spain. That they're saying, we are going to resist and we are going to campaign against this. Now, because people don't even accept the sanctions, let alone what you're talking about on the climate change business. I visited with, this would have been in May of this year, a man by the name of Kenneth Quinn. He used to be or he was, and he headed up what's called the World Food Prize. And this exists in Des Moines, Iowa.
Okay.
And it's a facility that many people have visited. Bill Clinton's been there, Bill Gates, but not just Americans. It recognizes development in areas all over the world of food production. And it was built in honor of a man by the name of Norman Borlaug. Norman Borlaug is the father of what was called the Green Revolution, which was a thing that happened back in the 60s and 70s, figuring out different ways of being able to multiply the yields from crops, which didn't have a whole lot to do with a whole lot of things, even with, there were some chemical and fertilizers and things like that involved. But the key idea was to figure out ways that were compatible with the relevant environments in different locations for increasing the yields of food.
Okay.
So the first thing I want you to all know, everybody that's listening, is that although America, which has really destroyed much of its agriculture since the 1980s and 90s, America today, its farmers could produce enough food left to their own devices to nearly feed the entire world right now and feed America. Well, that's also true, though, of many different locations of the world.
Absolutely,
Right? And by the way, it's interesting that you mentioned that to me because I'm not against bioengineering. I'm not against doing things which are technologically appropriate using chemicals. And there's one thing I'll just mention to you, that a scientist by the name of Freeman Dyson, who died in 2020, he was here at Princeton, at the Institute for Advanced Studies. I spoke with Freeman Dyson twice in person. He's very, very well known, and he wrote a book. Again, this one is called Dreams of Earth and Sky, and he has an essay called The Question of Global Warming. And Freeman was there when they designed the original computer models. He was an advisor at Princeton. He was at Princeton for 60 years. He was there before Albert Einstein got to Princeton. All right? So he was there to see the computer models originally.
Yeah.
And what Freeman said is the models don't tell you what's going on. He said, but there's something that you could do. And he talked about what he called carbon-eating trees. You know, trees consume carbon dioxide. He said, okay, now there's ways that you can, through biotechnology, modify the trees to consume more carbon dioxide. And what they're going to produce is oxygen, which everybody knows goes on.
Yeah, yeah.
He went through all this, right? And I won't go through read it all here. He just says, the science and technology of genetic engineering are not yet ripe for large-scale use, but the science is advancing rapidly, and the technology of reading and writing genomes is advancing even more rapidly. I consider it to be likely. He wrote this book about 10 years ago. We shall have genetically engineered carbon-eating trees within 20 years, and almost certainly within 50 years. So now, the reason he posed that was, when Freeman got all the material was sent to him, all the different statistics, and how do we model this? He's sitting in the room with all the other guys, right?
Yeah.
And he's telling them all what the problems are with the way that they're doing it. He preferred what are called analog models to digital. But here's the thing that he noticed. He noticed this, a fact that everybody should just know. He said that he had figured out that if you looked at any 12-year cycle, what every carbon dioxide molecule in the atmosphere is incorporated in a plant within a time of the order of 12 years. Therefore, if we can control what the plants do with the carbon, the fate of the carbon in the atmosphere is in our hands.
Oh,
now check this out, right? What's the
Wow.
problem? Now I heard what she said. I know about the thing with the chemtrails and so forth. You know, Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince, talked about that in an interview he gave, actually. Many people have talked about that. But I'm saying something a little bit different. See, I like the idea of refuting these people often with their own capabilities to point out that even those people who are saying we got to do all this messing with the climate don't actually wish to solve the problem of what? And I'm going to tell you what it is.
Yeah.
How to let more people on the planet live at a higher standard of living with greater freedom. That is the issue. That is what the issue is.
You know, talk about freedom. Freedom is completely being taken away from people. Well, quickly, I just want to let our viewers on Lovellsat that we are continuing this conversation on LN24 Essay, so you can join me and Dennis as we continue with this conversation on LN24 Essay. Now, Dennis, freedom is a thing that is being targeted right now. It seems that people's freedoms have just been thrown out of the window. We saw the same thing happening with the COVID-19 debacle, where people were actually being forced to vaccinate, even as much as not everybody was for the vaccination, but it became mandatory, you had to do it. Later on, we now had reports that no, it was a wrong move. You know, the after effects, people have died, some people have gotten damages. The story goes on. Now we're seeing the same thing with the climate change. I mean, to have a full president talk about going to get vaccinated in order to save your life from a hurricane is absolutely pathetic, to say the least. What would be a future where you have people living and having this mandatory carbon taxes or carbon emission taxes now being superimposed on people? Mind you, they also say that in respect to the climate change and for them to be able to control it, people's homes have to be reviewed. Now, the kind of building that you're in has to be reviewed. You now have to pay taxes. Already people are crying over how much life has really been difficult. I mean, America is suffering from a serious recession right now. Inflation is just skyrocketing. But what's the future with carbon taxes being imposed on people?
All right. So let's go down another level or up another level, depending on which way you want to see it. You keep referencing Biden. Yes, correct reference. But you also want to understand, just to say this, to get it out of the way, and then I'll come back to what you can do about it.
Yeah.
That since September 11th, the United States has operated with something called the Patriot Act, which has never been rescinded, even though that was supposed to be for the, quote, emergency of September 11th. We will leave out for a moment. We will suspend our judgment about the fact that the most powerful military in the world, with the largest air force in the world, was unable to scramble a single plane into the air to deal with the planes that were heading toward the World Trade Center, even after the first plane hit. You can say it was only 10 minutes after the second one. Yeah, but what about Washington, up at the Pentagon? That was another hour. But we're going to suspend judgment on that.
Okay.
See, a lot of people like to talk about the buildings, how they fell down and things like that. But, just look at something obvious that, this wasn't Botswana was getting hit by two planes blowing up buildings, and they couldn't, scramble some jets into the air. This is the United States.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So we're going to suspend judgment about that. Anyway, these laws go into effect. Okay. So that's the fight terrorism. Well, okay, let's assume that's true. Then they go to war with Iraq, which didn't do anything to anybody except take orders from CIA and Donald Rumsfeld, which is why they did originally have weapons of mass destruction, but they used those against the Iranians at the behest of the United States between 1980 and 1988. Okay, fine. Still, we invade Iraq. We do the thing there. Well, isn't it time to rescind the Patriot Act at that point? That's your problem, right? Afghanistan and no, because Saddam Hussein is still out. Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden still in the cave with, I don't know, some what has he got? Remote controlled drones or something. Mm-hmm. All right. Now I'm saying all that to just get this out of the way to where we get to Biden, because you can't also leave Obama out, because Obama's the same thing. It's part of the art of this, 20 years of change in America. But this change couldn't be done as suddenly as they wished. And what's important is it's not an American-powered process. It is a British, it's an Anglo-American powered process.
All right.
This is a critical thing. So, yeah, it's Anglo-American.
Okay.
Because the British have the imperial from the Commonwealth days. They've got what? They've got the profiles on people. They built the educational systems in these places. They were an empire which studied how you control the world with very few people, like they used to do in India, where they were always outnumbered, but they were able to control things by manipulating, by playing people against one another, things like that. Where we are, and the issue is, what can we do? Well, first of all, look at what is going on with Russia and China. People say, oh, well, communist, come on, Russia hasn't been communist for how long? The United States was all over Russia from 1991 to 1998, 99, in there. No communist system, running around, basically. They looted the place, and frankly, what happened was you got a reaction to that. You got a reaction to that, and Vladimir Putin came in. People can like him or not like him. The fact is that Russia is now a nation which is not at its knees and has declared that it's not. Now, whether you like or oppose or approve of the actions around the war, that happened. China just kept on keeping on, so to speak, having seen what happened to the Soviet Union back in 1989. They saw what happened with that whole thing, with the Berlin Wall coming down. They knew where it was going. They changed everything. And they had already begun that change earlier, back early as 1979-80. Mao died in 76. They began the changes with Deng Xiaoping at that time. They had to go through a certain evolution. But the fact of the matter is that they turned around everything. That's not communism. It was communism.
Yeah.
It clearly isn't. You say, well, they got a big communist party. Yeah, okay. They also have mega bucks. Where'd that come from? How did they become that productive as an economy? How do they have all these people with discretionary income? How come all those people are visiting and touring all over New York City? I see them all the time with the cameras and the whole thing. They're living good. Is that communism? See, so I'm saying this to say the following. What happened is, as of 9/11, the world's configuration, political configuration, radically changed.
Wow.
The
So,
United States and Britain, the city of London, in other words, taking the financial system, and Wall Street. Think about it that way rather than the names, because you say those two names, the United States and Great Britain, that sounds like the nations. But it's not. It's Wall Street and it's the city of London. Because of digitalization, because of all that stuff you see with Bitcoin, because of the whole idea of digitalized currencies, because of the whole thing done with the internet, all of which came out of military applications. That's where it all comes from. It comes from the American Department of Defense. So their concept was, let's set up a worldwide panopticon, that is to say, a universal surveillance circumstance in which we make all money and all forms of transaction digital.
yeah.
This means that it will go through the platform that we've got, that we've provided. All right? And anybody else trying to provide a platform, knock them down. Knock them down. Now, you can integrate people from any of those countries into your thing, because after all, you got a rule. So you will always look for a 1 to 5% elite. Stretch it to 10% if you have to, of any country,
So
no matter
Dennis,
who it is.
Dennis, would you say
That's
that the whole issue of this climate change hoax is actually being championed by the people who believe in the one world government, one world economy, one world religion? I'm talking about the globalist agenda.
I'm saying that the climate that's getting changed is the climate of freedom is getting changed. It's going to get real chilly real quick. It ain't going to be warming up. It's going to get real chilly real quick. And that's what they've always meant. When they say the planet, they mean their planet, not your planet.
Wow. All right, Dennis, just quickly because of time, we're going to have to round up. But I just wanted to take this, one last story before we call it a day. About over 200 respected scientists have signed on declaring that climate change is definitely a massive hoax. It is intended to pass tyrannical laws to control the people. There may be no greater threat to civil society than the climate change scam. But Dennis, I just want to come back to you quickly. How do people get out of this?
Okay, I'm glad you asked me that.
Yeah.
Here's what has to happen. Here's what has to happen. Take a page out of the ancestors because it will be very useful. I'm talking about Kwame Nkrumah, people like that, right? Or even Jomo Kenyatta. You say, well, how could we do that? Because that was a different world they were in. But here's what the character was. Let's look at Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King. Nonviolent direct action, creative nonviolent direct action, but an international coordination of this. Because remember, we're on the internet. I'm talking to you in Johannesburg. See, so I'm over here where I am, just outside of New York City. So what we're going to do is we, number one, expose this. We're doing that. But number two, we have to have an alternative. This is the key. So what is our alternative? Our alternative is, number one, we say the world actually needs more people. We say it's actually possible to have people that live at a higher living standard all over the world. And we say that you have to let there be independent, sovereign nation states, whether the form of government is as a republic or is a democratic republic or democracy, whatever the form of government is, because a lot of places have to come from wherever they are. They're not all going to be democracies. It's ridiculous. They come out of kingdoms and so on. So, but they have to be independent and sovereign. How do we make that happen? There has to be national banking, not international banking. You can have international banking, but you have your nation has to have its own currency.
Okay.
It has to be able to direct credit for industrial and agricultural and mining and manufacturing and infrastructural development. We have to have a situation where there are low interest rates for 30-year money, 30-year to 50-year money. The president of Barbados was just talking about that at the United Nations last week.
United Nations, yeah.
Okay, boom. Okay, and now what we do is we take this question of energy and we say, all right, if we know nuclear power is not generating nothing in the way of these carbon emissions, And we know that we can build this thing safely because they're small modular reactors. South Africa had one of the most advanced programs. They had that pebble bed reactor. They'd figured out a way to control the meltdown problem, and they even figured out a way to lessen the waste problem. And the waste thing you can deal with in several ways, go beyond our scope for right now today, but I could go through that, why you can deal with that. And then you're trying to move to higher orders of technology, which, for example, Cheikh Anta Diop wrote about in Black Africa, his short book on a program for economic and social development of Africa. Back in 1976, 77, he wrote this. Thermonuclear fusion power. He was aware of it back then. He was aware of these advanced technologies. So the truth is, China knows this. You know, other countries, the United States knows it. South Africa actually knows it at the top. This is the way. This is our way out. Now, the citizens, though, have to know enough about this to be able to pull what Dr. King pulled and Mahatma Gandhi pulled, because the concept of nonviolence, the reason for it, is that it keeps things clear about who is trying to oppress who and who's trying to solve the problem. And when you keep things clear so that the people who have been oppressed understand that they've got righteousness on their side, that they are not violating anybody, like happened in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission when that thing went down. Yeah. Which impressed the whole world.
Okay, Dennis, I literally have 2 more minutes left on my clock. You can continue, but we have to close in 2 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, fine. But you get the idea. That's the nature of it. In other words, political formations will now get off that left versus right thing. But what they will get into is the notion of patriotic meaning, nationalist, defense of themselves, and a collaboration with everybody that wants to agree with that. And what way we mediate it as people is through interchanges like this, and we just take it from there.
Oh, wow. All right, Dennis, thank you so much. But what we know is that this is a climate hoax. And just like you rightfully put it, people are just being pushed into a corner to do things that are not necessary for them to be doing right now. But thank you so much for shedding so much light on this whole issue of the climate agenda, because I know a lot of people have been concerned because it's also affecting the food. Now, a food crisis is fast becoming a reality, and that will be a problem to the human race.
You don't want them to eliminate your carbon footprint.
No, you don't want them to eliminate your carbon footprint, because that just will cause you to get controlled
the black people
and
that carbon footprint.
Dennis Speed, thank you so much for joining me on the program today.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dennis. And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining me on Worldview today. But that's all I have time for. So tomorrow is a Friday. I'm back on Monday, 4 p.m. South African time, and we can continue to view the world. For now, it's goodbye. God bless you.